The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor, a sound as sharp and final as a gunshot in the cavernous penthouse. Rosalind didn't flinch. She was 5 months pregnant, her hands trembling not from fear, but from a salt-quiet rage. Her husband, the man whose child she carried, didn't even look at her. His eyes, the color of old money and faded ambition, were fixed on the woman beside him. "Victoria is moving in," Sebastian Davenport said, his voice a silken threat. "And you, my dear wife, will attend to her needs. You will be her maid. You will serve her dinner, draw her baths, and do so with a smile. It's the least you can do for your keep." The penthouse on the 85th floor of 1 Vanderbilt in New York City was less a home and more a monument to Sebastian Davenport's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of a city that groveled at his feet. The furniture was minimalist expensive and profoundly uncomfortable, chosen by a designer who valued aesthetics over humanity. It was a perfect reflection of its owner. Rosalind Ashford Davenport once believed this sterile opulence was the pinnacle of success. When she met Sebastian, she was a promising young architect, her mind brimming with designs for warm, functional spaces that fostered community. He was a force of nature, a tech billionaire who had built his empire, Davenport Dynamics, from the ground up. He'd swept her off her feet with whirlwind trips to Monaco on his private jet, lavish gifts from Cartier, and whispers of a future where she would want for nothing. He had kept his promise. She wanted for nothing, because wanting required a soul, and hers had been slowly, methodically eroded. Her career was the first casualty. Sebastian had called it a sabbatical, a chance for her to relax and enjoy their new life. An architect of your talent shouldn't be burdened with clients, he'd cooed while simultaneously ensuring any potential offers that came her way were politely and terminally declined. Her friends were next. He found fault in all of them, too loud, too poor, too ambitious. He isolated her with the precision of a surgeon until his voice was the only one she heard. Now, pregnant with his child, his heir as he coldly called it, the isolation was complete. The penthouse had become her gilded cage, and Sebastian her keeper. The arrival of Victoria Beaumont was not a surprise. Rosalind had seen the tabloid photos, the late-night texts hastily deleted the lingering scent of an unfamiliar, cloyingly sweet perfume on his custom-tailored suits. Victoria was everything Rosalind wasn't, a sharp-edged, raven-haired socialite with a reputation as ferocious as her ambition. She was the kind of woman who wore her cruelty like a designer handbag. But the demand that followed was a new, breathtaking level of sadism. "Did you hear me, Rosalind?" Sebastian's voice cut through her stupor. He finally turned to look at her, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if she were a misbehaving pet. Victoria Beaumont watched from the plush, cream-colored sofa, a smug little smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. She took a slow sip of champagne, her eyes appraising Rosalind's slightly swollen belly with undisguised contempt. "You want me to serve her?" Rosalind's voice was a whisper, a fragile thing in the vast, silent room. "Precisely," Sebastian said, straightening his tie. "Victoria has certain standards, and frankly, with the staff constantly underfoot, it's a matter of privacy. You are here. You are not busy. It's a perfect arrangement." The logic was so twisted, so utterly devoid of empathy, that Rosalind felt a wave of dizziness. She placed a protective hand on her stomach. Her baby. This was the world her child was to be born into, a world where its mother was a servant to its father's mistress. "Sebastian, please," She begged the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'm pregnant. I can't. I won't do this." He took a step towards her, his 6-foot frame eclipsing the city lights. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. The menace was in the quiet. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, my dear. You think your condition affords you privileges. It does not. It is your single, solitary duty. You will do as you are told. Or you can walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on your back. And I assure you the prenuptial agreement Mr. Finch drafted is as solid as the foundation of this building. You will get nothing, not a dime, and you will never see your child." The threat hung in the air, suffocating her. He had her. He knew he had her. He had built the cage and locked the door, and now he was amusing himself by rattling the bars. Victoria stood up, gliding over to Sebastian and linking her arm through his. She looked Rosalind up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple maternity dress. "Don't be so dramatic, darling," she purred. "Think of it as practice for motherhood, all that fetching and carrying. Now be a dear and fetch me another glass of champagne. This one's gone warm." Rosalind stood frozen, the shattered glass at her feet, a mirror of her own broken life. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to scream, but the cold, hard reality of Sebastian's threat held her in place. Her baby. He would take her baby. With a heart that felt like a lead weight in her chest, she nodded slowly. Defeated. She turned and walked towards the kitchen, her bare feet carefully avoiding the glittering shards of her dignity on the floor. The sound of Sebastian's and Victoria's soft, triumphant laughter followed her all the way. In the cold, sterile kitchen, she leaned against the stainless steel counter, took a shuddering breath, and allowed a single hot tear to trace a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated hatred. And in that moment, she made a promise to the tiny life inside her. This would not be their story. This would not be their end. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture. Victoria moved into the master guest suite, a palatial space with its own terrace, overlooking Central Park. Her presence filled the penthouse like a toxic gas. Her demands were constant, petty, and designed for maximum degradation. Rosalind was to wake at 6 a.m. to prepare Victoria's freshly squeezed celery and kale juice. She had to hand-wash Victoria's silk lingerie because the machine ruined the delicate lace. She was required to be present but silent during Sebastian's business calls, ready to fetch a file or a glass of water at a moment's notice, a ghost in her own home. The true crucible, however, was the dinner party. Sebastian was entertaining a group of Japanese investors for his latest venture, a controversial AI surveillance technology. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal, and the penthouse was transformed into a stage for his power. Caterers and serving staff moved with quiet efficiency, but Sebastian had a special role for his wife. "You will serve Victoria directly," he had instructed her that morning, his words clipped and final. "You will be her personal attendant for the evening. You will wear the black dress. No jewelry." The black dress was a simple, formless sheath she had been given by the household manager. It was a uniform. It was meant to make her invisible. As the guests arrived, a sea of expensive suits and glittering gowns, Rosalind stood by the wall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched Victoria, resplendent in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, laughing and charming the investors. Sebastian was at her side, beaming, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. They looked like the power couple. The hosts. Rosalind was just part of the scenery. darling," Victoria called out, her voice carrying across the room. All conversation stopped. Every eye turned to Rosalind. "My feet are simply killing me in these heels. Be a dear and fetch my slippers from my suite, the embroidered ones." The request was trivial, but the public nature of it was a deliberate act of dominance. Rosalind felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She nodded, murmured a "Yes, Victoria," and walked out of the room, the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on her back. When she returned with the silk slippers, Victoria was seated on an ottoman, holding court. She extended a perfectly pedicured foot. "Well, don't just stand there," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Rosalind knelt. The fabric of her dress stretched tight over her pregnant belly as she bent down on the cold marble floor. Her hands trembled as she unbuckled the strap of Victoria's diamond-studded stiletto. The murmurs in the room were a low hum of discomfort and morbid curiosity. She could feel the investors exchanging glances, see the pity in the eyes of one of the caterers. As she slid the warm, soft slipper onto Victoria's foot, Victoria leaned in close. Her voice a venomous whisper only Rosalind could hear. "This is your place now. On your knees. Don't you ever forget it." Rosalind rose, her face a pale, emotionless mask. She retreated to her spot against the wall, her entire body shaking. But the night's humiliation was far from over. During dinner, she stood behind Victoria's chair. When Victoria's wine glass was empty, Rosalind had to refill it. When a morsel of food fell on the floor, Victoria looked at her expectantly until she retrieved it. The main course was a lavish lobster thermidor. Victoria took one bite, made a face of theatrical disgust, and pushed her plate away. "Oh, Sebastian, darling, I can't possibly eat this," she announced loudly. "It's dreadfully overcooked. Rosalind," she snapped, turning in her chair. "Go to the kitchen and have chef prepare me a simple arugula salad, lemon vinaigrette, and be quick about it." It was the final straw. It wasn't the command itself, but the public calculated cruelty behind it. To be dismissed, to be sent away from the table like a disobedient child in front of these powerful men whose respect Sebastian craved. In the gleaming industrial kitchen, surrounded by the frantic energy of the catering staff, Rosalind finally broke. She placed the lobster dish on the counter and leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The head chef, a kind middle-aged man named Jean-Pierre, looked at her with genuine concern. "Madame Davenport, are you all right?" She couldn't answer. The mask of composure she had worn for weeks was cracking. She saw her reflection in the polished steel of a refrigerator door, a pale, pregnant woman in a servant's dress. Her eyes hollow with despair. This was not her. This was not the life she would give her child. The promise she had made to her baby echoed in her mind. This will not be our story. Her estranged twin brother, Nathaniel. His face flashed in her memory. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since the bitter argument they'd had just before her wedding. "He's a predator, Rosie," Nathaniel had warned, his eyes pleading. "He doesn't love you. He wants to own you." She had called him jealous and controlling, throwing his words back in his face. She had chosen Sebastian, and Nathaniel, respecting her choice but hating it, had stepped back. But he had given her a burner phone before he left. "For a real emergency," he'd said. "When you're ready to see the truth, no tracking, no calls logged to your name, just for me." She had hidden it at the bottom of her knitting basket, a relic of a relationship she thought she had destroyed. Ignoring the chef's concerned questions, Rosalind walked out of the kitchen, not back to the dining room, but down a service corridor. She moved past laundry rooms and storage closets until she found a small, empty staff locker room. Her hands shook violently as she pulled the old, cheap phone from her pocket, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She had one call, one lifeline. She prayed he would answer. The phone rang once, twice. "Rosie." His voice. It was deep calm and instantly familiar. It was the sound of home. It was the sound of safety. A sob thick and guttural tore from her throat. "Nate," she choked out, collapsing onto a small bench. "Nate, you were right. You were right about everything. Please, you have to help me. He's going to take my baby." The silence on the other end of the line was not empty. It was heavy, dense, and terrifying. It was the sound of a storm gathering force just over the horizon. When Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice was transformed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something arctic and lethally calm. "Where are you? Give me the address. I'm coming, and Rosie, tell me everything he has done to you. Every last detail." Nathaniel Ashford was the quiet force to Sebastian Davenport's roaring fire. Where Sebastian built his empire on aggressive acquisitions and ruthless market manipulation, Nathaniel built Aura Innovations on brilliance and foresight. His company led the world in sustainable energy technology and ethical AI development. He was just as wealthy as Sebastian, arguably more so. But his name appeared on patents and in scientific journals, not in the gossip columns. He was the invisible titan, the man the loud billionaires feared, because they couldn't comprehend his motives. The phone call from his twin sister shattered the meticulous calm of his world. He sat in his minimalist office in San Francisco, a stark contrast to Sebastian's opulent prison. The plans for a new fusion reactor prototype were spread across his desk, but he saw none of it. All he could see was an image of his sister, pregnant and kneeling at the feet of another woman. The rage that filled him was a cold, precise thing. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a bar fight. It was the chilling, calculated fury of a grandmaster at a chessboard who has just seen his opponent make a fatal mistake. "I'm booking a flight," he said into the phone, his voice betraying none of the seismic shock he felt. "I'll be in New York in 6 hours. Do not let him know you've spoken to me. Do you understand? Go back out there, play your part. Endure it for a few more hours. It's the last time you will ever have to." "What are you going to do?" Rosalind's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm going to do what I should have done 5 years ago," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I'm going to take out the trash." He hung up, and the gears began to turn. His first call was to his chief legal counsel, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Arthur Finch. Finch had been with him since the beginning, a man who could find loopholes in an ironclad contract and turn them into gaping wounds. "Arthur," Nathaniel said, dispensing with pleasantries, "clear my schedule for the foreseeable future. We're going to war. I want you to re-examine the prenuptial agreement between Rosalind Ashford and Sebastian Davenport. I want you to find me an angle. Duress, fraudulent disclosure, anything. I don't care how thin it is. I want a weapon." "Understood," Finch replied, his tone immediately serious. He knew better than to ask for details yet. Nathaniel's second call was to Jenna Petrova, a legendary, near-mythical figure in the cybersecurity world. A former hacktivist who had once brought a G7 summit's digital infrastructure to its knees, she now ran a private security firm that worked exclusively for Nathaniel. "Jenna, I have a target," he said, pulling up a file on his computer. "Davenport Dynamics. I want everything. I want a full-spectrum analysis. Financials, internal communications, R&D, personal emails. I want to know where every dollar is buried, every secret project, every skeleton in Sebastian Davenport's closet. I need leverage, and I need it yesterday. Give me 24 hours. Jenna's voice crackled back, filled with professional glee. I'll give you his soul. His final act before leaving for the airport was to pull up his own company's portfolio. He scanned the list of venture capital arms and subsidiary investment firms Aura Innovations controlled. His eyes landed on a boutique firm called Argent Capital. It was a small, aggressive firm known for orchestrating hostile takeovers. It was also through a series of shell corporations entirely owned by him. He made a call to its director. The plan coalescing in his mind was audacious, brutal, and elegant in its simplicity. He wasn't just going to rescue his sister. He was going to dismantle Sebastian Davenport's life, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the rubble of his own arrogance. 6 hours later, Nathaniel's jet touched down at a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. He hadn't slept. He had spent the entire flight orchestrating the opening salvos of his campaign. As he stepped out into the cool night air, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rosalind on the burner. He's asleep. The party is over. I'm so scared, Nate. Nathaniel typed a quick reply. I'm here. I have you. We just need to get you out of there. Tomorrow. Be ready. He got into the back of a waiting town car, the city lights of Manhattan glittering like a diamond necklace in the distance. He looked at the shining spire of One Vanderbilt at the pinpoint of light on the 85th floor, where his sister was trapped. He thought of her, his twin, the other half of his soul being forced to her knees. A cold smile touched his lips, a smile that would have terrified Sebastian Davenport had he seen it. He was coming, and hell was coming with him. The next morning, Rosalind moved through her routine in a fog of adrenaline and terror. She prepared Victoria's kale juice, her hands steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shrun made her jump. Nathaniel's instructions had been simple and clear. Act normal. At 10 a.m., you will receive a call from a Dr. Matthews regarding a complication with your prenatal scans. You will feign distress. You will insist on going to the hospital immediately. You will refuse to let him or anyone else go with you. Say you need to be alone. It was a brilliant plan. Sebastian's obsession with his heir was the one vulnerability Nathaniel could exploit. Any perceived threat to the pregnancy would be taken seriously. At 9:59 a.m., Rosalind was in the living room, ostensibly organizing a bookshelf. Sebastian was on a conference call in his home office, the door ajar. Victoria was still in her suite. The burner phone in her pocket vibrated. She quickly silenced it and waited. A second later, the main house line rang. The household manager answered. Madame Davenport, a call for you, a Dr. Matthews. Rosalind took a deep, steadying breath and took the receiver. This is Rosalind Davenport. Mrs. Davenport, came a calm, professional female voice, an associate of Nathaniel's, no doubt. This is Dr. Matthews. I'm reviewing the results from your ultrasound last week, and I've spotted a slight anomaly I'd like to look at more closely. There's no need for alarm, but I'd like you to come in this morning if you can. Rosalind let the receiver clatter to the floor, her hand flying to her mouth. She let out a small, sharp cry of distress. It worked perfectly. Sebastian was out of his office in a second, his face a mask of concern. Not for her, she knew, but for his precious cargo. What is it? What's wrong? The doctor, Rosalind stammered, injecting a note of panic into her voice. The scans. She said there's an anomaly. She wants me to come in right now. I'll have the driver bring the car around, Sebastian said immediately, already reaching for his phone. No, Rosalind said a little too forcefully. She softened her tone. No, please, Sebastian. I need to do this alone. I need to get my head straight. Please just let me go by myself. I'll call you the second I know anything. He hesitated, his control-freak nature warring with his desire to appear accommodating. Fine, he conceded. But you will text me when you arrive, when you see the doctor, and when you leave. I want constant updates. Of course, she whispered, looking at the floor. 15 minutes later, she was in the back of the Bentley, being driven not to her usual obstetrician on the Upper East Side, but to a nondescript medical building in Midtown that Nathaniel had specified. She had nothing with her but the purse on her lap, inside of which was the burner phone. The car pulled up to the curb. She got out, told the driver to wait, and walked into the lobby. As soon as the glass doors slid shut behind her, she walked straight through the lobby and out a side exit. A black town car was waiting idling by the curb. The back door opened. Nathaniel was inside. The moment she saw him, the dam of her composure broke. She scrambled into the car, and he pulled her into an embrace. She was home. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the unconditional, fierce protection that she had so foolishly traded away. It's okay, Rosie, he murmured, his hand stroking her hair. You're safe now. It's over. He handed her a bottle of water and a small protein bar. Eat. You need your strength. As the car pulled into traffic, heading for a private airport in Westchester, Nathaniel's phone buzzed incessantly. He glanced at the screen. A new email from Jenna Petrova. Subject: The Davenport Dossier. He opened it. It was a thing of beauty and horror. Jenna had found everything. A hidden Cayman Islands account with millions siphoned from corporate funds. A string of emails detailing a plan to steal patented solar technology from a German competitor. And the crown jewel evidence that the foundational code for Davenport Dynamics' flagship AI software, the very code that had made Sebastian a billionaire, was not his own. It had been stolen years ago from his then partner, a brilliant programmer who had later died in a mysterious hiking accident. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. This was more than enough. This wasn't just leverage. It was a nuke. Where are we going? Rosalind asked, her voice stronger now. To a safe place, he said, turning the phone screen away from her. She didn't need to see the ugliness he was about to unleash. A house I own in Napa. It's quiet, secure. You can rest. You can be safe. I have doctors on standby to make sure you and the baby are healthy. And Sebastian. Nathaniel looked out the window at the city skyline. Sebastian is about to have a very, very bad day. Back at the penthouse, Sebastian was pacing, his anger growing with every passing minute. An hour had gone by. No text, no call. He had called her doctor's office only to be told Dr. Matthews was a fiction, and they had no appointment for Rosalind. He had called his driver, who confirmed she had entered the building but never came out. She had run. His first feeling wasn't worry, but incandescent rage. How dare she? How dare his possession defy him? He was about to call his head of security and put the entire city on lockdown to find her, when his own phone rang. It was his chief financial officer. Sebastian, we have a problem, the CFO said, his voice strained with panic. A massive block of our shares is being bought up through an anonymous fund. The market is spooked. The stock is down 12% in the last hour. We're on the verge of a panic sell. Sebastian felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. This was a coordinated attack. It was too precise, too aggressive to be a coincidence. As he was trying to process the financial assault, an alert popped up on his laptop. It was from the Wall Street Journal's top investigative reporter, Mr. Davenport. We have received a credible tip with supporting documents regarding the provenance of your company's core AI algorithm. We are running a story in tomorrow's edition. Would you care to comment? The walls were closing in. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a demolition. And he had absolutely no idea who was holding the detonator. The first 24 hours of Rosalind's absence were chaotic for Sebastian. His fury at her disappearance was quickly eclipsed by the sheer terror of the assault on his empire. The stock price of Davenport Dynamics was in free fall. The anonymous buyer, identified only through opaque filings as Argent Capital, continued to devour shares, triggering a wave of panic selling among smaller investors. His frantic calls to the heads of major investment banks were met with cool, non-committal responses. The sharks smelled blood in the water. Then the Wall Street Journal story broke. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, meticulously detailing how the core code of his celebrated Odyssey AI was virtually identical to a project developed by his late partner, a man named Kevin Rourke. The article included damning email fragments and quotes from former colleagues who had long suspected foul play. The narrative was explosive. Sebastian Davenport, the self-made tech visionary, was a fraud and a thief who had built his fortune on a dead man's work. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Key executives, seeing the writing on the wall, began quietly updating their resumes. Government regulators from the SEC announced a formal investigation into both the stock manipulation and the intellectual property theft allegations. In the penthouse, the atmosphere was thick with paranoia. Victoria Beaumont, who had initially reveled in Rosalind's absence, was now a nervous wreck. Her world was propped up by Sebastian's wealth and power, and both were evaporating before her eyes. "What is happening, Sebastian?" she demanded, pacing the living room, her voice shrill. "My Amex was declined at Bergdorf's. Do you know how embarrassing that is? It's a temporary liquidity issue," he snarled, throwing his phone down on a glass table. "Someone is trying to ruin me." "Well, they're succeeding," she shot back. "And where is your pathetic wife? Do you think she has something to do with this?" Sebastian laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Rosalind, don't be ridiculous. She doesn't have the intelligence or the spine to orchestrate something like this. She probably ran off to some women's shelter. No, this is a professional, a rival, someone who has been planning this for years." He was wrong. The architect of his destruction was not a faceless rival, but a man with his sister's eyes. From a serene, sun-drenched villa in Napa Valley, Nathaniel Ashford watched the demolition with cold satisfaction. He sat on a wide veranda, overlooking rows of grapevines, a laptop open in front of him. A live feed showed the plummeting stock ticker for Davenport Dynamics. Rosalind was sleeping inside, looked after by a private nurse. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes was beginning to fade. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Nathaniel had forbidden any news of the outside world to reach her. Her only job was to rest, heal, and focus on her pregnancy. The revenge was his burden to carry. Arthur Finch, his lawyer, sat opposite him, a stack of documents on the table. "Argent Capital now controls 38% of the voting shares," Finch reported. "We've swayed two of the largest pension funds. By the time the board meets tomorrow, we will have a controlling interest. The company will be his in name only." "And the SEC investigation," Nathaniel asked. Jenna's anonymous tip was very thorough, Finch said with a thin smile. They have the Cayman account numbers. They have the internal memos about the German patent. With the public pressure from the Rourke story, they'll have no choice but to file charges. At best, he's facing massive fines and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of any public company. At worst, he's looking at jail time. Nathaniel nodded slowly, his gaze distant. This was the methodical destruction he had envisioned, but it wasn't enough. The public humiliation, the financial ruin that was for the world. He needed something for Rosalind. He needed to look Sebastian Davenport in the eye as his world turned to dust. "There's one more thing, Arthur," Nathaniel said, closing his laptop. "Sebastian has called an all-hands emergency meeting at his headquarters tomorrow at noon. He's going to try to rally the troops' Project Strength. I want to be there." "Security will never let you in," Finch cautioned. "They will," Nathaniel replied, "because you're going to call their general counsel and inform them that the representative for Argent Capital, their new majority shareholder, will be attending. Get me a visitor's pass under my own name." He wanted Sebastian to see him. He wanted him to stand on his stage, full of bluster and arrogance, and then watch as the ghost of his sins walked into the room to pass judgment. The empire had crumbled. Now it was time for the king to fall. The main atrium of the Davenport Dynamics headquarters was a modern-day Colosseum, a 4-story cathedral of glass and steel built to deify its emperor. On any other day, the space hummed with the energy of ambition and innovation. Today, it was a tomb. Hundreds of employees stood clustered in nervous groups on the polished concrete floor, their faces a gallery of anxiety. They had been summoned by their leader, the great Sebastian Davenport, for an emergency all-hands meeting. They had come seeking reassurance, a lifeline in the middle of the corporate hurricane. What they were about to witness was an execution. Sebastian stood on a raised platform, a lone figure against a backdrop of a massive dark screen that usually blazed with the company's triumphs. He looked thinner, the skin stretched tight over his sharp cheekbones, but his eyes burned with a defiant, feverish light. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his knuckles white. He was a king, addressing his subjects from the walls of a besieged castle. "Team," he began, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing with practiced confidence. "I know you're scared. I know you've read the lies, the slander. You've watched our stock price assaulted by shadowy forces. You've been told that everything we have built together is a house of cards." He let the words hang, pacing the stage like a cooled predator. "They want you to believe that. The jealous rivals, the cowardly short sellers, the so-called journalists who profit from tearing down greatness. They have launched a vicious, coordinated attack, a campaign of misinformation designed by our enemies to break our spirit and bring this company to its knees." He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, intimate tone. "But they have made a grave error in judgment. They have mistaken a storm for an apocalypse. They have forgotten who we are. We are Davenport Dynamics. We are the innovators, the dreamers, the ones who build the future. This is not a crisis. It is a test of our loyalty, our strength, our resolve. And we will not fail." A smattering of uncertain applause broke out, more from reflex than genuine conviction. For a moment, it seemed his charisma might just be enough to hypnotize them one last time. It was in that moment that the monumental glass doors at the far end of the atrium hissed open. The sound cut through the applause, silencing it instantly. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was of average height, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark grey suit, but he moved with an unnatural calm and purpose that was utterly magnetic. He didn't rush. He didn't swagger. He simply walked his footsteps, making no sound on the vast floor, his gaze locked on the man on the stage. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Who was he? He carried no badge. He was not a face they recognized from the executive floors. Yet the two security guards at the door simply stood aside, their expressions stony as if they knew they were powerless to stop him. Sebastian faltered his speech, dying on his lips. He squinted at the approaching figure, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Security!" He snapped into the microphone, his voice tight. "This is a private company-wide meeting. Please escort this gentleman out." The man did not stop. He continued his silent, inexorable advance down the central aisle, the sea of employees parting before him like water. He came to a halt directly at the foot of the platform, forcing Sebastian to look down at him. The entire atrium held its breath. "You speak of faceless enemies, Mr. Davenport," the man said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried with chilling clarity to every corner of the room, no microphone needed. "Allow me to give your enemy a face. My name is Nathaniel Ashford." He paused, letting his name settle. It meant nothing to Sebastian, not yet. "I am the managing partner of Argent Capital," Nathaniel continued. A collective gasp went through the atrium. Argent Capital, the name of the phantom firm that had disemboweled their company's stock value. This wasn't an intruder. This was the commander of the invading army. Sebastian's face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. The lectern seemed to be the only thing holding him upright. I don't know who you are," he stammered, his bravado shattering like glass. "You have no right." "Oh, I have every right," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice turning to ice. He gestured to two men who had entered silently behind him and now stood at the back of the room, his lawyer, Arthur Finch, and a grim-faced federal marshal. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, Argent Capital, and by extension, I control 51% of this company's voting shares. My first act as the new majority shareholder is to inform you in front of all these good people whose livelihoods you've jeopardized that your resignation is accepted effective immediately. My second act will be to hand over a full server's worth of evidence to the SEC to aid in their investigation of your numerous fraudulent activities." He took a single step closer, and the space between them crackled with tension. "But this was never just about business, Sebastian. This is personal. This is a debt being collected." The confusion on Sebastian's face deepened. "Personal, I've never met you in my life." "No, you haven't," Nathaniel affirmed, his eyes narrowing. "But you met my sister. You married her. You took her into your home, and you tried to extinguish her light. You thought she was weak, a possession you could isolate and control. You belittled her intelligence, you sabotaged her career, and when she was at her most vulnerable, carrying your children, you subjected her to the most vile, sadistic humiliation." Recognition, followed by sheer, unadulterated terror, finally dawned in Sebastian's eyes. He connected the dots, the name Ashford, the face a sharper, harder, masculine version of Rosalind's. It was all there. "Rosalind." Sebastian breathed her name, the sound a ragged admission of guilt. "Don't you speak her name!" Nathaniel snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The calm facade cracked, revealing the furnace of rage beneath. "You forced her to kneel. You made her a servant in her own home. You threatened to take her babies from her. You made one catastrophic, unforgivable miscalculation, Sebastian. You assumed she was alone. He looked up, his gaze like a physical blow, and delivered the final devastating truth. Rosalind Ashford is my twin sister. The revelation detonated in the silent room. The puzzle pieces snapped into place for every single employee. This wasn't a corporate raid. This was a reckoning. This was an act of biblical justice orchestrated by a brother for his sister. Sebastian staggered back, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been shot. It all made sense now. The surgical precision of the attack, the bottomless resources, the relentless pace. It was all for her. You built your empire on a dead man's code. Nathaniel continued, his voice regaining its lethal calm as he listed the charges for the stunned audience. And I have burned it to the ground for what you did to her. You are finished, Sebastian. You have nothing. No company. No reputation. Your mistress boarded a flight to Geneva 3 hours ago. And as of this moment, you have no freedom. On cue, as if summoned by the words themselves, the federal marshal began his own slow walk down the aisle. He ascended the steps to the stage, the metallic sound of his shoes echoing in the silence. He held up a pair of handcuffs. Sebastian Davenport, you are under arrest for securities fraud and wire fraud. Sebastian stared, utterly broken. He looked from the gleaming steel of the handcuffs to Nathaniel's unforgiving face, and in that moment, he finally understood. He hadn't been defeated by a rival CEO or a market fluctuation. He had been destroyed by a quiet, pregnant woman he had deemed worthless, and by the love of a brother he never even knew existed. As the marshal snapped the cuffs around his wrists, the sound clicking with an air of profound finality, Sebastian Davenport was no longer a billionaire or a titan of industry. He was just a man who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating his victim and the avenging angel who stood in her shadow. The passage of a year can feel like a lifetime. In the sterile, time-diluted world of a federal correctional institution, it was an eternity of regret for Sebastian Davenport. Stripped of his custom suits, his power and his freedom, he became a cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms, a synonym for hubris and spectacular downfall. His conviction on multiple counts of fraud was swift and decisive, the mountain of evidence against him insurmountable. His 15-year sentence was a cold, hard period at the end of a life lived in exclamation points. The Davenport name, once a symbol of innovation and power, was now irrevocably tarnished, a brand synonymous with theft and deceit. His accomplice in cruelty, Victoria Beaumont, had vanished like smoke. Tabloids reported a sighting in Dubai, her face hardened by desperation, attempting to latch onto a new oligarch. Her 15 minutes of infamy had expired, leaving her with nothing but expensive out-of-season clothes and the bitter taste of irrelevance. The ashes of Davenport Dynamics were carefully sifted. Under Nathaniel's direction, the company was not merely acquired, but reborn. Rebranded as the Rourke Institute for Ethical AI, it became a non-profit subsidiary of Aura Innovations. Its new mission was to pioneer transparent and beneficial artificial intelligence, a living monument to the man whose genius Sebastian had stolen. All profits were funneled into a foundation supporting young, unheralded tech innovators, ensuring no other Kevin Rourke would ever be erased by a predator. But the real story, the one that truly mattered, wasn't unfolding in courtrooms or business pages. It was in a quiet, sunlit house nestled in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, a place where the air smelled of jasmine and new beginnings. Here time was not measured in months, but in milestones. The first smile. The first coo. The first time a tiny hand wrapped around a finger and held on tight. Rosalind Ashford. The name felt like a deep, clean breath after years of suffocation, was the center of this new universe. In her arms, she held her world, Nathaniel and Olivia. The twins, born healthy and strong 2 months prior, were her anchors and her wings. The delivery had been long and arduous, but Nathaniel had been there, a constant, steady presence, holding her hand, wiping her brow, and being the first to weep with joy when his niece and nephew entered the world. He had looked at her, then her face exhausted but radiant, and seen not a victim, but a warrior at the end of her greatest battle. Her new home was a testament to her rebirth. She had designed it from the ground up, a beautiful sprawling space of warm cedar-cool stone and enormous glass walls that blurred the line between inside and out. It was a house built for laughter, for scraped knees, for sunlight, and living not for sterile display. In her studio blueprints were spread across a large oak table. Her new firm, Ashford & Associates, was thriving. Her first major project was a pro bono design for a state-of-the-art women's and children's shelter in Sacramento. She poured all her talent into creating a space that was not just safe, but beautiful and empowering. A place that felt like a home, not a holding cell. She was using her hard-won freedom to build cages with open doors. This evening, she sat with her brother on the wide stone porch, the sky above them streaked with the violet and gold of a California sunset. Each of them held a sleeping baby, swaddled and content. "A letter came today," Rosalind said quietly, her eyes on the darkening hills. "From the prison." Nathaniel's posture stiffened instantly. The calm in his eyes was replaced by the familiar protective fire. "What did the bastard want?" "What you'd expect," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "He used a lot of words like remorse, atonement, and misguided. He said the silence of his cell has made him realize that I was the only thing that ever mattered. He said he dreams of his children." She paused, her voice hardening slightly. "He had the audacity to ask for a picture." Nathaniel let out a quiet, dangerous breath. "I'll have Arthur put a stop to any further contact. He has no right." "It's already taken care of," Rosalind said. She nodded towards the living room, where a fire was crackling merrily in the hearth she had designed. "I opened it. I read it. And I felt nothing. Not fear, not sadness, just a kind of distant pity for a man so broken he thinks words can patch the void where his soul should be. I wanted him to know that his last attempt to have any power over me, even the power to cause me pain, failed. Then I threw it into the fire." She shifted Olivia in her arms, stroking the baby's soft cheek. "He isn't their father, Nate. A father is a protector. A father is a source of strength and unconditional love. A father doesn't use his own child as a weapon against their mother. He's just a donor of damaged DNA. You," she said finally. Turning to look him in the eye, her own gaze clear and fierce. "You are the one who shows up. You are the one who loves them without condition. You're the man they will look up to. You are their family." Tears welled in Nathaniel's eyes, and he looked away overwhelmed by the fierce love and gratitude he felt for this woman, his other half. A comfortable, profound silence settled between them, punctuated by the chirping of crickets and the soft breathing of the twins. Rosalind looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son, Nathaniel asleep in his uncle's arms. She thought of the woman she had been a year ago, a ghost in her own home, a prisoner in a penthouse, her spirit withering under the weight of relentless cruelty. She had been so close to breaking, but she had not broken. She had been forged. The fire that was meant to destroy her had instead burned away the fear, the doubt, the years of carefully conditioned submission. It had revealed the core of unbreakable steel within her. She had emerged from the ashes of Sebastian's ruined life, not as a victim seeking refuge, but as a phoenix reborn and soaring. Her future was not an escape from her past, but a deliberate and beautiful creation of her own design. A legacy of strength, love, and resilience she would build for her children, one warm, sunlit day at a time. That was the incredible story of Rosalind Ashford's journey from a gilded cage to a life of freedom and strength. It's a powerful reminder that the most opulent settings can hide the darkest forms of abuse, and that true wealth lies not in money or power, but in courage, family, and the will to reclaim one's own life. Rosalind's story shows us that even when all hope seems lost, a single call for help, a single act of bravery, can ignite a fire of justice that can burn down even the mightiest of empires. It proves that a person's true worth is not determined by who they are married to, but by the strength and resilience they find within themselves. If Rosalind's harrowing tale of survival and her brother Nathaniel's epic quest for justice moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories like this. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, click subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a single story of triumph over tribulation. Thank you for listening.